הנגב יורד ליל הסתיו ומצית כוכבים חרש חרש את הרוח עובר על הסף עננים מהלכים על הדרך כבר שנה לא הרגשנו כמעט איך עברו הזמנים בשדותינו כבר שנה ונותרנו מעט מרבים שאינם כבר בעינינו אך נזכור את כולם את יפי הבלורית והטוהר כי ראות שכזאת מעולם לא תיתן את ליבנו לשכוח אהבה מקודשת בדם את תשובי בינינו לפרוח
Australians all let us rejoice for we are young and free with golden soil and wealth for toil our home is just by sea our land abounds in nature's gifts our beauty rich and rare in history's stage and every stage our God's Australia fair in joyful strains then let us sing and mark Australia fair.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Zionist Federation of Australia and our 6 state Zionist councils, I'm honoured to welcome you to this special event to mark the anniversary of the assassination of former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, Zichrono Livracha. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land across this great country and pay my respect to their history, their culture, and their precious ongoing contribution to our nation. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, now a quarter of a century ago, had a profound impact on Jews and non-Jews alike all over the world. The shock and horror of the news when it broke made it one of those moments that we recall in our bodies as much as in our minds. I remember the day vividly. Deep in the dark hours of the morning, the phone rang, waking up the entire house. It was an Australian journalist seeking a comment from my father about the assassination of the Israeli Prime Minister by a Jewish Israeli. I was an idealistic 15-year-old religious Zionist and a passionate member of B'nai Akiva. To be told that the sitting Israeli Prime Minister had been assassinated, not by terrorists, but by a fellow religious Jew, brought my world crashing down. I couldn't absorb how this man, this murderer, had contrived and fully embraced a religious justification for such extreme and fanatically evil action. Yigal Amir was one of us and had been brought up in a tradition not dissimilar to mine. I had watched Yitzhak Rabin shake hands with Yasser Arafat like everybody else, with some trepidation. But I shared Israel's excitement about the prospect of a new peace for the region. And I deeply admired Yitzhak Rabin's courage and commitment to delivering a better future for both Israelis and Palestinians. So regardless of our political affiliations, I see the 25th anniversary of his assassination as an opportunity to reflect on the legacy of Rabin's life of service to the State of Israel and the Jewish people, and to learn the lesson from his assassination by a fellow Jew. We know that while Yigal Amir pulled the trigger that ultimately killed the Prime Minister, this heinous act was not committed in a vacuum. Some rabbis couldn't resist the temptation of mixing religion and politics, and in doing so, created an atmosphere of hatred and incitement. Many others committed the no lesser sin of remaining silent in the face of such incitement. As Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks says, when you mix religion and politics, you get terrible politics and even worse, religion. So with the idealism of my 15-year-old self and the resolve of my 40-year-old self, my message to you all tonight is that it is incumbent on all of us, the silent majority, to actively, determinedly call out extremism in any form from any source, whether it's from the left or from the right, whether it's anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia or homophobia, whether we're sitting around the Shabbat table, the university quadrangle, or the yeshiva study hall. We must challenge extremism that describes a political leader with a differing view as a traitor, or separates the world into those who are for us and those who are against us. This disease is not unique to the right or to the left. Sadly today, it permeates both worldviews. Engagement outside of our comfort zone and respectful, nuanced debate is the only path to a better place for our troubled world. Let me conclude by quoting from the powerful maiden speech delivered by Tehillah Friedman, a new member of the Knesset, in which she called for an alliance of the moderates. The centre I'm talking about is a principled centre, she said. A centre that is willing to sacrifice in the name of moderation and democracy, of a Judaism that makes place for others, a centre that with its very being protects the rules that allow us to manage our differences without breaking us into pieces. Ladies and gentlemen, extremism is seductive, yet it only ever ends in destruction and chaos. Our program this evening is not only a tribute, a reflection, but also a call to action. 25 years after the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, we, the silent majority, must no longer remain silent.
יזכור אלוהים את נשמת יצחק בן רוזה ונחמיה רבין, חייל, מפקד ומצביא, מדינאי, חולם ומגשים, אשר נקטף מעולם העשייה ומעולם החזון, וחדורי המרצח בין עמנו. נזכור את הרעות אשר ליוותה את דמותו, דמות החייל, הלוחם והמפקד, שר צבאות ישראל, מאז ימי הפלמ"ח וצה"ל. נזכור אל הלוחם אשר ייחל כל ימיו להגיע אל היום שבו יוכל לחטט את חרבו למזמרה, לשבת תחת גפנו ותחת עינתו, בעין מחריד וליהנות מפרי השלום. נזכור את המדינאי אשר חזה עתיד אחר לעם ישראל, לחם את מלחמת השלום ונפל מחדורי מרצח בין עמנו, תהיה נשמתו צרורה בצרור החיים.
איפה ישנם עוד אנשים כמו האיש ההוא אשר היה כערבות הבוכיות איפה ישנם עוד אנשים כמו האיש ההוא אשר היה קרבות המוחיות למרגלות הנולד ליד הנחל בחורף שם בין ערבות מוחיות בקיץ בנורות פצעי המים נפשו שילת על פני הנחל לדגה מקנה הסוף קרק לו עפיפון וכשהיה לי איש מכיווני ערבות הבוכיות נטע סוכה ואבן המבצר האפורה בנה לו בית על מי הנחל תחנה הקים זרה שדות שלח אונו על פני הים ואונו צוחר אך יש אשר יניע כלי מלאכתו ויהיה פתאום נהיה לאיש אחר איפה ישנם עוד אנשים כמו האיש ההוא אשר היה הערבות הבוכיות איפה ישנם עוד אנשים כמו האיש ההוא אשר היה הערבות הבוכיות למרגלות הנולד ליד הנחל עידון זו נפש על ההר או בא בחיים ובנופלו בבוקר לא אבות אחד על אדמתו יקנו לו אחוזת עולם ליד אמות המים השקטות איפה ישנם עוד אנשים כמו האיש ההוא אשר היה כערבות הבוכיות איפה ישנם עוד אנשים כמו האיש ההוא אשר היה כערבות הבוכיות
Good evening, dear friends, members of the Jewish community in Australia, far, far away from Israel. I am honored and very excited to address you tonight as you, with us, designate the 25th anniversary to the assassination of my father, Prime Minister and Minister of Defense of Israel, that was shot down in a peace rally in Tel Aviv, November 4th, 25 years ago. I think it's the first time that the whole Jewish community of Australia are with us, are celebrating this event, which is so significant and so important to us, the family, the members of the Rabin Center, and all our friends and supporters in Israel. ביקשתם לספר על הצד האנושי, הצד שלו כאבא, ואני אנסה להעביר לכם בכמה מילים דברים שהם בדרך כלל יותר אישיים ויותר קשה לדבר עליהם, אבל חשוב שאנשים ידעו שיצחק רבין, המנהיג, האיש שלחם על עקרונותיו כל חייו, היה קצין מצטיין ורמטכ"ל מנצח, היה שגריר בלתי רגיל בארצות הברית, יצר את היחסים עם ארצות הברית, וניסה להביא שלום לישראל, ונרצח כאשר הוא בדרך הזאת. האיש הזה, המנהיג הישר והצנוע, היה אבא למופת. הוא היה איש מופנם, איש ביישן, אבל איש חם, שאהב אותנו יותר מכל, שהיה איתי תמיד כשהייתי חולה, היה הולך איתי לרופאים, היה ישן איתי במיטה כשהייתי חולה. בא לבית הספר כאשר ביקשנו ממנו להרצות. היה לו פרויקט מאוד חביב עליו, זה המוביל הארצי. בכלל נושא המים היה מאוד קרוב לליבו, והוא הבין מגיל צעיר עד כמה המים הם נושא חשוב למדינת ישראל. אז כשביקשתי ממנו, הוא בא להרצות לכיתה שלי, כשהיינו בני 12, על המוביל הארצי. אנחנו במוזיאום שלנו במרכז יצחק רבין מציינים את סיפורה של החברה הישראלית, כאשר הוא שזור בתוך הסיפור הישראלי, ובעצם, בלי לומר זאת במפורש, החותם שלו מצוי בכל פרק ובכל תקופה בתולדות מדינת ישראל, בבניית החברה הישראלית, בשימור הדמוקרטיה הישראלית ובהעצמתה של מדינת ישראל כאור לגויים. לצערנו הרב הוא נרצח באמצע דרך שבחר בה, ומאז אנחנו מוצאים את עצמנו בימים אחרים. אני מתכבדת להדליק נר לזכרו, כאן במשרדי אשר במרכז יצחק רבין. אנחנו נוהגים להדליק את הנר כפתיחה לאירועי יום השנה, בכל שנה מאז הרצח. ואני מאחלת לכולכם שתהיה לנו שנה יותר טובה, שנתמודד עם פגעי הקורונה ושנצלח אותם בהצלחה, ושנזכה לימים טובים יותר בעולם כולו ובישראל בפרט, ויהי זכרו של אבא שלי ברוך.
ממשלת ישראל מודיעה בתדהמה, בצער רב וביגון עמוק, על מותו של ראש הממשלה ושר הביטחון יצחק רבין, אשר נרצח בידי מתנקש הערב בתל אביב. יהי זכרו ברוך.
שואלים אותי, למה אתה מתגעגע ביצחק רבין? והתשובה היא כמובן ליצחק רבין עצמו. אני מתגעגע לאיש שירד לחיי, במובן הטוב של המילה. אני מתגעגע לאיש שגנב איתי את כל השוקולדים מהבונבוניירה, וביקש שלא אספר לאף אחד, אפילו לא ללאה. לעשן הסיגריות שאפף אותו, למאפרות המתמלאות ללא הרף, לטירוף שלו לדיוק, לעמידה בלוחות הזמנים, לחתונות שהגענו אליהן ב7:30 בערב, כי כך היה כתוב בהזמנה, ולא מצאנו לא חתן ולא כלה ולא חתונה. לדממה שהסתררה בחדר העבודה שלו, אחרי שהחליט על פעולה צבאית מסוכנת, ואחרי ששרי הממשלה והקצינים הלכו לדרכם, והותירו אותו לבד עם המחשבות והערעורים. אני מתגעגע להיסוס שלו, למעצור, לשניות הקשות כאשר עמד לפני דלתות של בני משפחות שכולות, כמו מסרב להיכנס פנימה. אני מתגעגע גם לנזיפות שלו וגם לחסרונותיו, לירידה שלו לפרטים הקטנים, והלא תמיד נחוצים וחשובים, לבוטות שלו, לעלבונות שלו היו במקומם, למילים המיותרות, למבטים שלא תמיד היו סימפטיים ואמרו הכל, לעצבנות שלו ולקוצר הרוח. אני מתגעגע להיסוסים שלו ולשיקול הדעת, לניסיון העצום שצבר במסלול חייו, ללילות בלי שינה, לסדר היום המטורף, לקור שנדף ממנו, לחום שהוא ידע להעניק לסביבתו, לדאגה העצומה שלו לחיי כל חייל, לבכי שלו בלי דמעות עם כל הודעה על פיגוע, לחריקת השיניים. אני מתגעגע גם, ואולי עוד יותר, לתנופת העשייה האדירה בימיו של יצחק רבין, למחלפים שנבנו בכל רחבי הארץ, לכבישים שהורחבו, לשעות החינוך שהוכפלו ושולשו, לצמיחה שזינקה לגבהים, למלחמה המוצלחת באבטלה שירדה לתחתיות, לתיירות שהגיעה לשיאים, לעשרות המפעלים החדשים, לבנייה העצומה ביוקנעם ובאור עקיבא, בבאר שבע ובירושלים. אני מתגעגע ליחסים שפרחו עם טוניס ומרוקו, קטר ואומן, עם בחריין, דובאי וירדן, ללחיצות הידיים עם עשרות מנהיגים מקצווי עולם. כן, אני מתגעגע.
אני הולך לבכות לך, תהיה חזק למעלה. געגועי כמו דלתות שנפתחות בלילה. לנצח אחי אזכור אותך תמיד, וניפגש בסוף, אתה יודע. ויש לי חברים, אבל גם הם קווים אל מול אורך המשגע.
כשהעצובים הולכים לים, לכן הים מנוח.
וזה עצוב שלהחזיר ציוד אפשר לא געגוע.
לנצח אחי אזכור אותך תמיד, וניפגש בסוף, אתה יודע.
ויש לי חברים, אבל גם הם קווים אל מול אורך המשגע. כמו הגלים אנחנו מתנפצים אל הנצח, אל החיים. וכמו הגלים אנחנו מתנפצים אל הנצח, אל החיים. אני הולך לבכות לך, תהיה חזק למעלה.
My sister, Mrs. Leah Rabin, my friends, I had never thought that the moment would come like this, when I would grieve the loss of a brother, a colleague and a friend, a man, a soldier who met us on the opposite side of a divide whom we respected as he respected us. A man I came to know because I realized, as he did, that we have to cross over the divide, establish a dialogue, get to know each other, and strive to leave for those who follow us a legacy that is worthy of them. And so we did, and so we became brethren and friends. I've never been used to standing, except with you next to me, speaking of peace, speaking about dreams and hopes for generations to come that must live in peace, enjoy human dignity, come together, work together, to build a better future, which is their right. You lived as a soldier, you died as a soldier of peace, and I believe it is time for us all to come out openly and to speak our peace for all the times to come. We belong to the camp of peace. We believe in peace. We believe that our one God wishes us to live in peace and wishes peace upon us, for these are his teachings to all the followers of the great three monotheistic religions, the children of Abraham. Let's not keep silent. Let our voices rise high to speak of our commitment to peace for all times to come. And let us tell those who live in darkness, who are the enemies of life, and through faith and religion and the teachings of our one God, this is where we stand. This is our camp. May God bless you with the realization that you must join it, and we pray that he will. But otherwise we are not ashamed, nor are we afraid, nor are we anything but determined to fulfill the legacy for which my friend fell, as did my grandfather in this very city when I was with him and but a young boy. Rabin was a man of courage, a man of vision, and he was endowed with one of the greatest virtues that any man can have. He was endowed with humility. He felt with those around him, and in a position of responsibility, he placed himself, as I do and have often done, in the place of the other partner to achieve a worthy goal. And we achieved peace, an honorable peace, and a lasting peace. As long as I live, I'll be proud to have known him, to have worked with him as a brother and as a friend, and as a man. And the relationship of friendship that we had is something unique, and I am proud of that.
ברצח רבין הייתי בכיכר, בתל אביב. הייתה שם כל כך הרבה תקווה, כל כך קיווינו שהשלום הזה כבר ממש בפתח. בדרך חזרה הביתה, אמבולנס נכנס פנימה. ידעתי שמשהו קורה, אבל לא העליתי בדעתי עד כמה הדבר הזה שקרה הולך לשנות את חיינו.
I remember I was living on Kibbutz Gazit in northern Israel as part of a wider group from HaSHLOMI ARTZI Australia. I remember some members of that group had gone down to Tel Aviv that evening to be part of the peace rally.
בערב הרצח אשתי הדס ואני היינו בהום סנטר. כמה דקות אחרי הרצח כל הטלוויזיות בחנות החלו לשדר שידור ישיר מהכיכר והזרימו ידיעות בדבר האסון הכבד שנפל עלינו. לדאבוננו ולצערנו הרב, קהל רב של אנשים פתח בקריאות צהלה ושמחה, רגעים קשים שנצורים איתנו עד היום.
I was on Shnat with Habonim, but I was in Jerusalem that night watching a movie with my cousin. Suddenly, in the middle of the film, there was a loud banging at the door, and somebody yelled into the theater that Rabin had been shot.
I was 14 years old when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. I was at my parents' home watching TV on that Saturday night when the news broke on television.
I was in my kibbutz with my husband. I think we were watching Crocodile Dundee it was the movie on the night. It stopped and we had the breaking news and it was terrible. Like we could not believe that this is actually happening.
I remember myself sitting at home peacefully, enjoying my time, watching TV, watching sport at TV. When the breaking news came in, sad, shocking, Rabin has been assassinated.
I was here in Perth, early morning, just got up. My husband listened to the news and he called out, "I can't believe it, Rabin's dead. He's been assassinated by an Israeli."
I heard the news of Yitzhak Rabin's assassination on the radio while driving home.
בתום העצרת, כשהעיריות פילחו את ליבו, הייתי לא יותר מ-50 מטר מהמקום, אבל רק עבור 10 דקות כשהגעתי לדירתם של חבריי, ממש מול בית חולים איכילוב, הבנתי שסירנות האמבולנס ששמענו היו של הרכב שהביא לשם את ראש הממשלה שלנו, ושם הוא גם נפטר.
הדבר הראשון שעלה לי בראש כששמעתי את החדשות היה שזה פשוט לא יכול להיות. לא יכול להיות שהערב המושלם הזה ייגמר בצורה כל כך טרגית.
איך לא הייתי בעצרת לתמוך?
I recall being stunned, absolute disbelief. I couldn't understand how Israeli security would have let Palestinian terrorists into Israel, let alone to assassinate the Prime Minister. It never occurred to me that the assassination may have been perpetrated by an Israeli citizen.
First thing that went through my head was Hamas had finally got their man. I was totally shocked and devastated when I found out that it was actually murdered by an Israeli Jew.
I remember at the time just thinking, I hope that it's a terrorist, somebody from the outside.
My first thoughts were that the Palestinians had killed him. So I could imagine the shock I felt to hear it was a fellow Jew, an Israeli, Yigal Amir.
The first thing that came to my mind was Why? Why would anyone would like to do something like that?
My initial response was disbelief and then sadness.
The first thing that went through my head was utter disbelief and shock that this could occur in Israel.
מאוד הופתעתי שמישהו מבני עמנו מסוגל לרצוח על דעות פוליטיות דמות כזאת מיוחדת.
אני זוכרת שהייתי עם חברה אז, והמחשבה הראשונה שעברה לי בראש, שהיא הסתכלה עליי ואמרה לי, ענת, תארי לך, הוא יהיה על כיסא גלגלים, ואני יושבת ומסתכלת עליה ומסתכלת על המסך, ואני לא יודעת איך להסביר את זה, אבל פשוט ידעתי שהוא ימות. זאת הייתה התפנית הכי גדולה בחיים שלי.
Israel has lost its way.
Both my wife, Edith, and myself ran to the other room to have a look at our 2-year-old daughter, Ron. She was sleeping peacefully, calmly, and we knew that we promised her to grow up in strong, independent Israel as a Jewish and democratic state.
And I remember the first thought that came through my head was really fear and apprehension and a strong sense that this is a new historic period that we're entering, that I'm living through a historic event in the most terrible way.
התחושות הראשונות שלי כשנודע הרצח היו של עצב עצום וזעם. הם עדיין כאלה, הם לא חדלו ב-25 השנים מאז. הרעיון שמישהו מאיתנו הישראלים ירצח את אחד מגיבורי האומה היה בלתי מתקבל על הדעת. אבל התמימות, עצימת העיניים לנוכח הכיתוב והפילוג הסתיימו בירייה אחת.
I am honored to be speaking today to the Australian Jewish community and thank the Zionist Federation of Australia, in particular President Jeremy Laibler, for the invitation to address this important event commemorating the late Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's Prime Minister, who was assassinated by an Israeli terrorist 25 years ago. I knew the late Yitzhak Rabin during 3 long periods of my life. The first, during his first term as Prime Minister, when I was a young officer, and then after, when he was the Minister of Defense and I was the commander of IDF's elite unit, Sayeret Matkal. The second was during his second term as Prime Minister and the negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, and then after with the Jordanians. And the third was after his assassination, when I was leading AHARAI, an NGO with its main purpose being to honor Rabin's legacy. The first period, July 1976, Rabin was Prime Minister and I was a team commander at Sayeret Matkal. An Air France plane that took off from Ben Gurion Airport to Paris was hijacked and rerouted to Entebbe, Uganda. On Saturday, July 3rd, we took off from Ben Gurion Airport on 4 C-130 Hercules military aircraft to Entebbe. We landed there at approximately 11 p.m. and within 90 minutes, half past midnight it was, I, who was the last Israeli soldier on Ugandan soil that night, climbed into the last Hercules and took off back home. Several years ago, at the 14th anniversary in memory of Operation YONATAN, that included the hostages and us, their rescuers, Amos Aran, the Director General of the Prime Minister's office under Rabin at that time, gave us a small peek into the drama on that Saturday morning, before the Israeli cabinet approved the operation. Rabin asked him to come to his private home at Ramat Aviv on Saturday at 7 a.m. he arrived there on time and saw Rabin pacing back and forth in his living room. An ashtray on the table in the living room, filled up with cigarette butts, caught his eye. And he understood that Rabin had been awake for the whole night. Rabin told him that he had decided to approve the operation to rescue the Israeli hostages, Jewish and Israeli citizens, from Entebbe, and asked him to call for an immediate cabinet meeting. He asked him to give every single one of the ministers the opportunity to say loud and clear whether they approve or reject the operation, and that he should insist on receiving a clear recommendation from each one of them. He did not want anyone to hide in the shade. But before Amos left, Rabin requested two additional requests. The first, to ask HAIM Bar-Lev, who was at that time the Minister of Commerce and Industry, to speak first and give his recommendation. Rabin knew that my father, the late HAIM Bar-Lev, was aware that I was supposed to be one of the team commanders at the raid. Rabin also knew that all other ministers, all of them, were aware of this as well. And he assumed that if my father approved the operation, all other ministers would approve it as well. And so was it. But Rabin had another request from Amos. He said, prepare a registration letter that I will hand to the president, Ephraim Katzir, if the operation fails. Amos asked him, what would you consider a failure? And Rabin replied, if we return back with 20 coffins. To conclude this story, there were many heroes during that operation that due to their courage, the rescue of Entebbe, the rescue in Entebbe was a success. But each one of them knew that there was someone above them with a wider responsibility. The late Yitzhak Rabin was the highest one, and there was no one above him. He knew that if he would approve the operation, he will have to take the full responsibility not only for a success, but at the same time for failure if it were to happen. And so he did. Fortunately, it was a success, even though, sadly, we came back with the body of our unit commander, Yoni Netanyahu. 3 months later, as a commander of a special operation, I was about to mount with my team on 5 helicopters that had just landed at our base to take us far away, far away beyond enemy lines. The helicopter's rotors were roaring wildly, and as we were about to climb in, I saw an official car coming and approaching us. It stopped just under the first helicopter where I was standing, the rotor roaring loudly, and Prime Minister Rabin got out of it. This was not a place for dramatic speech, which anyway none of us would be able to hear under the roaring rotors. Rabin approached each one of the soldiers, shook their hand firmly, and finally approached me as the final one. He looked deep into my eyes. I felt clearly what he wanted to say. It's going to be dangerous and risky. But I, the Prime Minister of Israel, on behalf of all citizens who will never know where you are heading to or the importance of your mission to Israel's security, want to thank you on behalf of all of them and wish you good luck. This was a true leader and a human being. 8 years later, when Rabin was Israel's Minister of Defense in the unity government led by Yitzhak Shamir and Shimon Peres, I was already the commander of Sayeret Matkal. For 3 years, believe me, 3 very, very long years, including nights, very long nights that sometimes never ended and sometimes ended too soon, from 1984 to 1987. I met with him almost every second week while presenting each and every operation beyond enemy lines for his approval. He was always sharp, clear, precise, and most of all, inspiring. The second period. The second period began 6 years later in 1993 with the Oslo Accords, which were signed while Rabin was Prime Minister and I was a brigade commander. Due to my academic background, and more specifically to a book I wrote a couple of years earlier that dealt with potential security arrangements in the Golan Heights between Israel and Syria, I was asked to take part in the IDF's committee that negotiated with the Palestinians on the first agreement that was called Gaza and Jericho First. Several months later, I also took part in the negotiation with the Jordanians on the peace agreement with them. I had many hours with Prime Minister Rabin. In most of them, I could see and even feel the enormous weight of responsibility that was lying on his shoulders. I saw him moving back and forth, sometimes even swinging from hesitation to decision, grappling with what might be right move for Israel's security and its future. He saw the many obstacles that were ahead as well as the opportunity. But once he made a decision, it was clear for all. After the peace agreement with Jordan was signed, I decided to complete my service in the IDF and retired. Several months later, I was asked to fly to the United States and meet with a number of Jewish communities and present to them the agreements that were signed with the Palestinians and with the Jordanians. My first speech was on Saturday morning of November 4th at one of the synagogues in New York. A couple of hours later, Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated. What shocks me even today is that once I was informed about the assassination, and before I even knew who the assassin was, it was almost obvious to me that it was not a Palestinian terrorist, but an Israeli citizen. The polarization and hatred within the Israeli society was at that time wide and dangerous. And unfortunately, it has only got worse ever since. The third period. A short while after Rabin's assassination, a group of young Israelis in their 20s decided that they have the responsibility to honor and continue Rabin's legacy. They called themselves Generation for Peace. In the beginning, they felt that they should focus on Rabin's legacy, the part in his legacy that dealt with security and peace. Not too long after, they realized that Rabin's legacy should stand on two pillars that Rabin led as Prime Minister. Aside from security and peace, the second pillar should relate to Rabin's efforts while serving as Prime Minister to closing the gap within our society, mainly focusing on education and social issues. At that time, I was a volunteer in this NGO, and was approached by one of the leaders of the group with the idea to establish a group of teenagers from one of Tel Aviv's low socioeconomic suburbs and prepare them for their mandatory service in the army. From the state's independence and until today, there is a common understanding that the mandatory service in the IDF is a melting pot of Israel's society. Youngsters drafted from all over the country have the opportunity to meet and get to know each other. The purpose of the NGO was to give these youngsters from Israeli periphery, whether geographic or socioeconomic, a better opportunity to integrate into our society and even lead by completing a meaningful service in the IDF. We call this movement Acharei, which is the Israeli commander's call to his soldiers in the battlefield. Follow me, not move ahead or other calls, but follow me, meaning see what I'm doing and how I head and do the same. Follow me. We began with one small group with a dozen of teenagers, boys and girls, from one of Tel Aviv's suburbs. And within a year, we grew up to 5. Within 15 years, Acharei had become the biggest NGO for teenagers with over 200 groups all around the country, covering all the different facets of Israeli society, including groups of Druze, Bedouins, and even ultra-Orthodox teenagers. Several weeks ago, Israel, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, signed a peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. 2 important peace agreements with 2 Arab states. One more step towards Rabin's hope that Israel will live in peace with all of its neighbors. A step that perhaps would never have happened if in his time Rabin didn't make the first difficult move towards the Palestinians and the Jordanians. The late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's legacy is still with many of us. To live in peace with our neighbors, to narrow the gaps within Israeli society, and that Israel will become an exemplary state as our prophets in the Bible destined for us. May late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin's memory will be forever blessed.
הייתי איש צבא 27 שנים, נלחמתי כל עוד לא היה סיכוי לשלום. אני מאמין שיש סיכוי לשלום, סיכוי גדול, וחייבים לנצל אותו למען אלה שעומדים פה, למען אלה שאינם עומדים פה, והם רבים בעם. תמיד האמנתי שמרבית העם רוצה בשלום, מוכן ליטול סיכון לשלום, ועל כן כאן, בהתייצבותכם בעצרת הזאת, מוכיחים עם רבים אחרים שלא הגיעו לכאן, שהעם באמת רוצה בשלום ומתנגד לאלימות. אלימות היא כרסום יסוד הדמוקרטיה הישראלית. יש לגנות אותה בתבונה, להוקיע אותה, לבודד אותה. זו לא זו דרכה של מדינת ישראל.
For me, Yitzhak Rabin is a symbol of never giving up. He, in his last remarks before he was assassinated, talked about how he was insistent on making peace with Palestinians even though he wasn't so connected with their struggle. Despite this, he really truly wanted to exist in harmony and wanted the best for both sides.
רבין בשבילי הוא איש לשלום. הוא מסמל את השלום שאנחנו יכולים להגיע כבני אדם ועל השלום שגם אפשרי להגיע. כל אפשרים חושבים על זה. רבין גם הראה לי שהקשר שלי עם הארץ יותר חזק ממה שחשבתי.
Rabin to me, I think, embodies the last great push for peace. His legacy of optimism and courage will live long in the hearts of anyone who associates themselves with the notion of peace.
To me, Rabin was an incredible leader as a Prime Minister who did some miraculous things in the name of peace.
To me, Rabin symbolizes determination. Throughout his whole life, he has this determination and passion for not only creating a Jewish state in Israel, but creating the best Jewish state possible. He is someone that is greatly missed, not only in Israel, but in all around the world, in the diaspora, and I think that we need more Jewish leaders that are like him in the future.
אני מקווה שהדורות הבאים ייקחו מהמורשת של רבין את המשפט שהוא אמר על מדשאות הבית הלבן כשחתם הסכם שלום עם ירדן. אני, יצחק רבין, יוצא יחד איתכם למלחמה על השלום. המלחמה היחידה שאין בה הרוגים ופצועים. המלחמה היחידה שתענוג להילחם עבורה.
From his assassination, we all have to learn to be a little bit more understanding of one another, to listen to what other people have to say, and never, ever take a life just because somebody has different political views or different views on anything than us.
A leader who was a warrior and a fighter and then changed his ways and decided to go for peace and sacrificed his life for that.
בשבילי, במילה אחת, הוא ארץ ישראל בזמן קום המדינה.
And I hope his death also is a sobering reminder of the devastating effects of fanaticism in any form.
I think for me, Rabin, his legacy will be, do not ever give up on your dream to have a better future.
יצחק רבין עבורי הוא מדינת ישראל, על תקומתה ושברונה.
One word I would associate with Yitzhak Rabin: bravery.
Balanced and sincere leadership.
Courage.
דוגמה אישית ומנהיגות.
Leadership.
The buck stops with me. No ifs, no buts, no excuses.
Leadership and hope.
Peace and hope for the state of Israel.
תקווה.
Out התקווה, the hope.
מלח הארץ.
Yitzhak Rabin, the ultimate statesman.
A leader and a statesman.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
Shalom Chaver.
שלום חבר. שלום חבר. שלום חבר.
שלום חבר.
the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, Zichrono Livracha, remains in the memories of those who witnessed it from near or far, in the national memory of the State of Israel and in the collective memory of the Jewish people. Tonight, just as we've reflected on the shocking episode in history, we've also paid tribute to the man, the leader, and most importantly, his legacy. Yitzhak Rabin was a true leader, whether as a soldier, a diplomat, a politician, or a statesman. The legacy of his vision, his commitment to the State of Israel, to democracy, to peace, and to tolerance are ours to embrace and pursue. Our presentation tonight has taken us through Rabin's life and shown us how in our societies, wherever we may be, the values he espoused do indeed transcend time and place. Never more have we needed tolerance, peace, and clear and value-driven leadership. I hope that tonight you were able to find Yitzhak Rabin's inspiration from the music, the vision, and the words. This very special online event has been brought to reality by every presenter and performer you've seen here, and thanks to each and every one of you for your contribution. Envisioned and overseen by a wonderful committee, whose names you'll see on the credit reel that follows, and brought together by our creative and dedicated team, Moria Ben David, Emily Gian, Haleli Kimchi, and Michael Mannheim, whose combined expertise and talent and whose individual heart and soul commitment made this so very special. Thank you. On behalf of the Zionist Federation of Australia and our partners tonight, State and Territory Zionist Councils, the AZYC, and our own Habayit, good night and thank you for joining us.
וכיכר העיר מוארת, רבבות כל אוהביך, נהרו אל העצרת, נאספו לראות פניך, את נבוך שמו כילד, את קולך בשיר נתת, הגורל נקש בדלת, ואתה כלל לא שמעת. שוב ושוב עובר בירת, מי יכול היה לדעת מה נאמר, ואין מילים פשוטות יותר. שלום חבר, בעודך תובל באושר, ובשיר שלום פוצח, שם בחושך לשעת כושר, כבר המתין המרצח, הכיכר כולה הומה, ולב אל לב נפתח כפרח, אקדחו טעון במוות, ועיניו קרות כקרח. ליל הסתיו יורד על נגד, ערבה בוכה מנגד, גם למעלה אין מילים פשוטות יותר. שוב ושוב עובר בירה, מי יכול היה לדעת מה נאמר, ואין מילים פשוטות יותר. שלום חבר, רחובות שטופים בבכי, יום ולילה בשבוע.